As we gather here on our campus, eager to delve into the crucial issues surrounding our planet's biodiversity, it's a privilege to introduce Niharika Rajput, wildlife artist at Paper Chirrups, National Geographical Explorer, and a visual science communicator. With a passion for fostering a safe haven for winged creatures, today's distinguished speaker, Niharika, will seamlessly weave together the realms of wild art and visual science communication to address the looming climate crisis through an avian lens. Taken her across continents, where she was honored an artist in residency program by Alan Brooks Nature Center in British Columbia. Niharika illuminates the path towards a more sustainable future by bridging the power of art and communication. In today's discourse, Niharika will share insights into her past projects, community outreach programs, and workshops. So join me in extending a heartfelt welcome to Niharika, this artist and advocate for sustainable nature.
Thanks a lot, Anjali. Yeah, I'll just quickly share my screen. You can see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So just a quick heads up, it's going to be more of a storytelling session. Decorated in the hues of warm brown and black, engineered to fly, I sit here upon a rock, with dark clouds looming over my head. I'm wondering about my future, the future of my family. How much longer before they displace us from our home, our land? I have taken on an arduous journey and descended on your window panes. Are you willing to listen to my story? I am the Nilgiri pipit, a resident of the montane Shola grasslands that are disappearing at an alarming rate. In 1973, the Shola grasslands were 1,360 square kilometers. But by 2017, 516 square kilometers had been completely wiped out. We are in 2024. You can only imagine the undocumented deterioration. Invasive species like pine, wattle, and eucalyptus are taking over native species. Anthropogenic activities like construction of roads and houses and agriculture are shrinking my territory. We are not migratory birds. This is our home. We have nowhere else to go. So I'm making an appeal to you. Will you share my story? I'm Niharika Rajput, wildlife artist, creative conservationist, a visual science communicator, and a National Geographic explorer. My journey as a wildlife artist began with self-doubt. I asked myself, can art really influence young minds? Can it really inspire communities to take action? Here's a picture of Guru Prasad. After one of my workshops in Valparai, he walked up to me and handed over a small piece of paper. And on being asked what was in it, he responded, Akka, here's my autograph. One day I'm going to be a world famous wildlife photographer. There have been many Guru Prasads who've reached out to me over the years, expressing their interest in wildlife and ecology. And this gives me hope that art can inspire young minds. It can influence communities to take action. I'd like to invite all of you to travel back in time with me. In 2015, when an opportunity to travel to the trans-Himalayan region of Ladakh knocked on my door, a girl consumed with wanderlust could not resist the opportunity. So there I was at Bakula Rinpoche Airport, heavily clad with oxygen levels falling at 11,000 feet and Om Mane Padme Ho playing in the background on repeat. Every nook and cranny of Ladakh breathed of spirituality, and it far exceeded my expectations. But it also left me heartbroken. 10 days into my trip, and this is what I was left with. Melting glaciers, recurrent flash floods, disappearing wetlands, rampant plastic pollution, mini hills of plastic cropping up among real ones, and lastly, the endangered biodiversity of Ladakh, specifically the black-necked crane, also known as Chartungtung Karmo. I found myself staring at a small hill through my bedroom window, weeping profusely. And the only voice I could hear was a choked, enraged whisper. How could we let this happen? It was only very recently that I came across these two terms, climate anxiety. And I asked myself, have I been a victim of climate anxiety? And it took me back to this very moment. So I went back to Ladakh in 2016, determined with my first grant from Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, and collaborated with Ladakh Arts and Media Organization to conduct multiple workshops in government and government-aided schools in Laytown and across Ladakh, introducing the concept of visual science communication through art and also teaching them bird watching through bird guide books and binoculars. Here are some images of the workshops that I conducted in areas like Puga, Sato, Chushul, Somoriri, Sokar, etc. I also put together this temporary exhibit at Ladakh Arts and Media Organization where I built 4 miniature sculptures of the black-necked cranes which soared high at Lamo. This exhibit was very well received by the local community as well as tourists alike. This Art for Wildlife Conservation initiative snowballed into Ladakh's first ever bird festival, which I conducted in collaboration with Darashiko Foundation and Ladakh Arts and Media Organization. It was a 7 days long affair, and we planned a plethora of activities during this 1 week. It kick-started with a theatre performance on the birds of Ladakh, followed by a musical performance by local Ladakhi musicians, highlighting the significance of birds in folk tales and also how birds are seen as sentient beings in Buddhism. Moving on, we conducted an art exhibition in which we had artists from across the country who came in and showcased their artwork on the birds of Ladakh. We had everything from paintings to animation to textile art, you name it, it was all there. All the artists conducted multiple workshops during this festival. I personally conducted a workshop at Puga Nomadic School with the nomadic children. And after the workshop, we took them out on a bird watching trip just across the school campus. And we were lucky enough to spot a pair of the black-necked cranes. We also organized a day-long conference where we had the DFO and other avian experts who came in and shared their papers and spoke about why the numbers were dwindling. So all in all, it was an educational effort and people learned a lot, especially on the day of the conference. Towards the culmination of the festival, we also installed this permanent installation, which is about 22 feet tall. And it was made by a local Ladakhi artist named Chimit Dorje. What you see on your screen is basically made out of scrap metal. It's not an exact replica of the black-necked cranes, but if you ever happen to visit Laytown, you'll definitely come across this installation. In 2016, I was awarded an Artist in Residency program by Kaitani Cultural Center and Alan Brooks Nature Center in Vernon, British Columbia. This was a 3.5 months long project. Now, the focus of the project were the hummingbirds found in the Okanagan Valley. I specifically was focusing on 3 hummingbirds, namely Calliope, Black-chinned, and Rufus. So basically, the purpose of the project was to not only create life-sized sculptures of these hummingbirds, but also to conduct workshops with children and members of the local community. So I basically taught them how to build very simple basic models of these hummingbirds. So what you see on your screen are some images from these workshops. I also had the privilege of collaborating with members of the Okanagan Naturalist Club who had been banding these hummingbirds for many years and tracking their migratory patterns. So it was very interesting all in all because towards the end of the project, members of the Okanagan Naturalist Club came in and gave a presentation on the hummingbirds found in the region. So very important but also very basic information was shared, like how to prepare your hummingbird nectar, where to hang the hummingbird feeders, what kind of plants to have in your backyards to attract more hummingbirds, how to differentiate between the male and the female, or the adult and the juvenile. And also, they put up on display a lot of the equipment that they use, what you can see on your screen right now. So, the hummingbird bands that they put up, the hummingbird traps that they use, the feeders that they use, etc. So, otherwise, it would be inaccessible for the general public to see all of this. So, I think all in all, it was definitely a success, and people learned a lot about the hummingbirds, found in the Okanagan Valley. Here's an image of the hummingbirds that I built back then. Um, yeah. Moving on. So my area of specialization has always been birds, but I had an opportunity to collaborate with Wildlife Trust of India on this particular project, which was called the Gaj Yatra or the Gaj Mahotsav. Now they hired about 100 odd artists to build 100 elephants to raise awareness about the elephant corridors found in India and also the human wildlife conflict. So what you see, so for this particular project, I built 2 elephants, which were about 4 feet tall. What you see on your screen right now is not just a colorful elephant with colorful abstract patches walking out of a pride parade, but these abstract patches are actually maps of all the elephant corridors found in India, all the way from North India down to South, covering East and West as well. Like I mentioned, it was a traveling exhibit and it is still going on. Some of my work was recently exhibited at Kochi Biennale. So if any of you get an opportunity to visit Kochi, Fort Kochi, maybe you'll get to see these elephants. If not, I'm sure you'll definitely come across these elephants at some point. Over the years, I've been conducting workshops with wildlife organizations, forest departments, schools, nature interpretation centers, etc. Here's an image from one of the workshops I conducted at WWF New Delhi, which was on the house sparrow. So back in 2012, Mrs. Sheila Dikshit named the house sparrow the state bird of New Delhi because the numbers were falling drastically. And over the years, because of a lot of human intervention and some pilot projects like the Sparrow Village, which has been created on the banks of Yamuna, and they have installed some insect hotels as well. So the numbers have started going back up, and it's heartening to see that the numbers have started going up. So it's a positive change. Here's an image from a workshop I conducted at Koringa Wildlife Sanctuary. This was for a bird festival which was organized by the Forest Department of Andhra Pradesh. And I taught children how to build very simple basic models of the Indian skimmer. And it was such a beautiful location. We were, in the mangroves, and there was so much wildlife for children to see and learn from. During COVID, I conducted many workshops virtually with children and adults alike. Here's an image from a workshop I conducted in Bangalore very recently at Kupu Festival of Climate Action. So basically, what's really the purpose behind conducting these workshops? Growing up, my education was restricted within the 4 walls of the classroom, and it was all about rote learning and getting marks and getting grades, etc. But I personally feel that children should be free-willed and free-ranged and not factory-farmed. So just to give you some perspective, to share some figures with you, NASA commissioned a study which was conducted by George Land to study the creative genius in children. And what they found was at the beginning of this test, NASA handed out these creative tests to about 1,600 odd children in the age group of 3 to 5. And what they found out was that at the beginning of this, about 98% of the children had that creative genius in them. At the age of 10, only 30% of them had that creative genius. At the age of 15, only 22% of them had that genius. And by the time they graduated and finished their education, only 2% of them had that creative genius. So what's really the problem with our traditional educational setup? So what George Land found was that these education setups are basically promoting 2 forms of thinking, divergent and convergent. So the divergent form of thinking basically promotes imagination and new ideas, whereas the convergent form of thinking promotes judgment and evaluation. So when they were promoting both the forms of education simultaneously, it led to a cognitive clash, which suppressed the creative prowess or the creative genius in our children. So obviously, the basically he said that it's better that these education systems or our educational paradigms should promote divergent thinking rather than promoting both the forms of thinking together. And I also truly believe that I mean, nature is the best educator. If you can spend time outdoors and learn from nature and learn in nature, then there's no, I mean, it's the best way possible. So that's what I'm trying to do through these workshops. Moving on, in 2022, I was lucky enough to receive a grant from the National Geographic Society for a project in the Western Ghats, specifically in Kodaikanal, Tamil Nadu. I collaborated with Kodaikanal International School Center for Environment and Humanity and put together this permanent motion sensor triggered exhibit featuring 12 hyper-realistic sculptures of endemic birds found in the Shola Sky Islands. So this project was not only about putting together this exhibit, or rather this tactile, tangible experience of being in the Shola forests or the grasslands, but also I conducted multiple workshops in government and government-aided schools, and we conducted bird watching sessions for children down Bombay Shola so that they could, see these birds in person. I'll just quickly play this video for you so that you can see what the exhibit looks like. So what was so unique about these Shola birds? Why did we choose the Shola birds for this exhibit? So when the geographical epoch of Pleistocene happened, it led to fragmentation in the Western Ghats. So there are certain valleys in the Western Ghats. You have the you have the Palghat Gap, you have the Chalyar Valley, you have the Shenkuta Gap. For example, the Palghat Gap is, I think, almost 40 kilometers long. So these valleys, they became too deep and wide. And then when we look at the temperatures, down in the valleys, it's slightly warm, but when you start moving up, it starts getting cooler. So because of these climatic fluctuations and because of the depth of these valleys, some of the Shola birds actually stopped moving from one mountaintop to the other. Now that's a very strange behavior that they started exhibiting. Birds should be able to fly anywhere, right? So that's why the birds are so unique, and as a result of this, they evolved in isolation, and birds from the same family haven't actually crossed paths for millions of years. And that's also what's so unique about this exhibit, because you'll see that under the same roof you'll find all the four laughing thrushes and the sholicolas, commonly known as shortwings, under the same roof, birds which haven't crossed paths for millions of years. This is how the exhibit looks like from afar, and everything that you see here is made out of, at least the birds are made out of paper wire and epoxy, and the landscape, which is depicting the Shola grasslands, and the forest again was made out of paper mache clay and static grass, and the rock also was made out of paper mache clay. And obviously it was all done by me, and everything is handmade with some assistance from volunteers at the center. I'd also like to add here, because I think this will be of interest to you, that we collaborated with ICER Tirupati. So Dr. Robin Vijayan, who's an evolutionary biologist and has been studying these birds for the last 23 years, actually planted the seed of doing this project in my head back in 2019. And so this is a motion sensor triggered exhibit. So when you walk into the space, you can actually hear the bird calls. And the bird calls, obviously, we borrowed from the students of ICER Tirupati who had been recording these using bioacoustics. So that's something that I thought you guys should know. Moving on, yes, I mean, this is a video of how students have been engaging with the exhibit. So I'll quickly play that for you. So we not only had school students who came in, but also had universities who've been coming in and seeing the exhibit and trying to understand what the problems are in the Palani Hills. And what's also interesting is that Kodaikanal International School has a lot of foreign collaborators, and they have a lot of exchange programs. So we had students who came in from New York University and State University of New York, who saw the exhibit and understood what was really happening on ground. So this project not only has a local reach but also a global reach. Here are some images from the workshops I conducted. teaching them how to build very simple basic models of the Nilgiri flycatcher and the black and orange flycatcher. And here are some images from the bird watching trips that we conducted. Dr. Rajamanikam, who you can see in the image, is an expert, or rather, he knows the wildlife down Bombay Shola very well. So he was the one who was leading these trips. It's just so interesting for children to see the exhibit first, because they get to see these birds, they get to see the color of the plumage, the size of the bird, they get to hear their bird calls, and then walk out and try to spot these birds in the wild. um, so I'd just like to conclude by saying that art and design can most often rather be seen as something that's trivial and unnecessary. But I think art has the power to, or rather, art can be a conduit towards communicating the climate crisis in the most creative and impactful manner. Whether it is Rohan Chakravarti's green humor comic strips, or Asher Jay's digital illustrations, or even stand-up comedy on climate change, or the ice stupas which are being built by Sonam Wangchuk to mitigate the water crisis in Ladakh, or replacing animal leather with coconut leather, or using mycelium, which is essentially fungi, to build boats and buildings, or even creating vegetal canopies and pollinator gardens on top of bus stands. It's all really art and design. And I think moving forward, you'll only find that there's this undaunted proliferation in sustainable approaches, and they provide such a beautiful vantage point for the bigger apex players in the market to not only change their strategies but also scale things up. And to be honest, we are at the cusp of time, and we need to diversify this narrative of climate change. We need people from all walks of life, from different professional backgrounds, to come and sit on the same table and find solutions to real problems. So, the purpose of my work is to basically not only awaken a sense of curiosity, but to also address the urgency of the situation at hand. And the very foundation of my work lies in the hope that all of these issues will be investigated and advocated for at a more cerebral level in terms of conservation efforts and policy making. And it is truly in this hope that I continue to inspire, illuminate, and influence a generation of eco warriors. Thank you. So I think we can open the floor to questions if anyone has any questions for me.
So I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Ms. Niharika for weaving a captivating narrative around her life experiences in wildlife conservation. Your personal journey and insight has enriched our understanding of the deep connection that art and awareness shares. So thank you for contributing to the success of our event with your presentation. We will be taking questions from the meeting. So anyone who has a question can raise their hand and unmute themselves.
Anurag. Yeah, Anurag, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for the wonderful talk. It was a very nice talk. I had never actually attended a talk like this where a person who is personally so determined. I mean, yeah, it was a very insightful talk. Including myself, and I can say with pride that I have spotted the most number of species on campus here.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, so I do have such thoughts where you mentioned about climate anxiety, and we feel like what the efforts that we are putting in might sometimes be futile. Um, so, how do you cope with such thoughts, even though you're putting so much effort in? Do you still feel like we must do more of grand scale things, or
Anurag, I remember having this conversation with Dr. Robin himself. When when I was doing this project, he took me, and we had a few of our program officers from Nat Geo who came down to Kodaikanal, and he took us to Berrijam Forest, and he took us to meet the forest department officials, the forest rangers, etc. And he showed us the scale of damage that's actually happening. So the map that I shared initially in my presentation, when I got to see that firsthand, that when I was looking at the area that he was showing, there was a very small patch of grassland, okay, and rest of it was all eucalyptus, wattle, and pine. So I asked him that, you've been working on these birds for the last 23 years, and you can see what the scale of the problem on the ground is. Even if the forest department, even though they have reintroduced native and exotic species of grass, they'll never be able to recover the grasslands the way they were initially. That will never happen. And then there are so many issues inside the forest department as well. The forest department of Tamil Nadu is doing one thing, the forest department of Kerala is doing one thing, and the Western Ghat extends all over, right? So I what is the future? I mean, what does it look like? You guys have been doing so much research and you're putting in so much work. He said, if there's going to be a downfall, I'll be here to see it. And if something changes, I'll be here to see it. So I think as individuals, we should keep doing what we can do, whatever is in our hands. And rest, I mean, what we can't do is just something that we'll have to accept eventually. But at least, what we can do, we must do. We should never say that, okay, anyway, things are going to, take a downfall, so we should not do anything about it. So I guess we can do what we can do. That's how it is.
Yeah, thank you. Hope you can make it to campus sometime. We'd like to have you here, and
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
can have more conversations. Yeah,
Yeah, I'd love to come
thank
down.
you.
Thanks.
Okay, so there's a question in chat. If you want, I can read it out for you for the offline participants as well. So Niharika, when you do these workshops, what is the difference you observe in participants from different age groups? As in, are college students more interested or as interested as school students? Because making paper sculptures is a relatively new concept. So, what is, according to you, the difference that you observe in engagement?
Thanks, Arul. I have conducted workshops not only with children, not only with college students, but with adults who are, in their 40s, 50s, 60s as well. So obviously, the experiences are very different. When I conduct workshops with children, they are extremely excited about building birds, and they're mesmerized by the sculptures when I show them, and they can't believe that that's something that I have created. So obviously, for children, yes, it's the hand building activities are quite engaging, and after they build that, they want to build more of these birds, and they start looking for birds outside as well. I've had children send me pictures of birds that they've spotted in their vicinity, and they always want me to ID them. I'm no bird expert, so I can't always ID the birds, but yeah, I do try to help them out. With adults, what I have noticed is that when they engage in a hand building activity like this, they're reminded of their childhood days and of playing with clay or building something with their hands, and it takes them back to their childhood. And then also, people who have no interest in birding suddenly want to actually go out there and spot these birds and learn more about birds. So I think it's different for different people, but definitely, I mean, I've conducted so many workshops over the years, and I have had people from all age groups reach out to me, and some of them have taken up birding very seriously. So that's definitely a positive change, and that makes me happy.
I think there's another question. If you could read it out yourself and like you can answer
Yeah,
the question as well.
I'll do that. So Aditya is saying, I know these works looks appealing and very interesting, but on practical ground in India, can art and wildlife exploration help us earn sufficiently up to our needs? Hmm. By earn, are you okay? India can art and wildlife exploration. I'm not sure I understand the question. Aditya, do you want to reframe your question? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Actually, I want to ask, these things looks very appealing and very interesting. As a child or even the student of 12th or 11th, I want to pursue this. But I want to ask, like in India, these things really valued and could be pursued as a profession to
Okay.
like live a proper life?
Okay, got it, got it. Thanks, Aditya. See, initially when I was starting out back in 2016, I had no idea if I could turn this into a career because I didn't know if people would be interested in one, buying these sculptures, two, I had no idea if I'd be, creating these permanent natural history type museums that now I've done with the National Geographic project. Yes, there is a lot of interest, not only from the birding community, but we have a lot of wildlife enthusiasts. We have, there are so many individuals, companies, corporates that are interested in buying works like this. But with this particular project, I think it has opened up more avenues. And I'm not just restricting myself to birds now. There are other projects in the pipeline, and I'm looking at building caracal cats, and I'm also considering getting into creating sculptures of pollinators. So it doesn't just have to be birds, it can be butterflies, hummingbirds, all different kinds of sculptures that you can do. So basically expanding on that front, and having these like I mentioned, these natural history museum setups. So there are permanent as well as temporary exhibits. For example, WWF Delhi just approached me for an exhibition on the mangroves in India. So that has nothing to do with the kind of work that I am doing, but because I have created this sort of habitat, the Shola Sky Islands, or the Shola grasslands and the forests in this particular exhibit. They wanted me to not only build these trees, but also create the whole ecosystem. So have all the wildlife in place as well. So there are opportunities out there, and if you want to, get into it now, it's not late at all. You can definitely get into it, and if you need any assistance or any help from my end, I'll be happy to help.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think, am I getting your name right? Is it Nafsa?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. I'll just read out your question. For someone interested in taking up a creative endeavor like yours, how would you advise them to go about it? Also, how did you find yourself in this field? So Nafsa, I'm completely self-taught. I have no formal training in wildlife or art. But I would personally suggest that if you can, maybe go to an art school or college, or as it is, you guys are in ISA, so you have that wildlife background. If you can get some kind of formal training, it will definitely help you, because it took me a lot of time. I did a lot of experimentation, made a lot of mistakes, learned from my mistakes. So I think it'll be good if you can get some if you can go to an art school or college. That being said, I think having internet as your tool in today's day and age, it really helps a lot. So I think you should make use of that as well, and social media can really help. I personally, when I started out, I think it was back in 2016 when I when I basically collaborated with this organization called Birders Against Wildlife Crime in the UK, and I built these sculptures of the hen harriers, the male and female, for a campaign that they were running in the UK. So that's how I got started out, and it was on Twitter. Really, I never met anyone in person. So, like I mentioned, social media can really help. And then from there on, it just kept growing, and people saw my work on social media, mostly Instagram. And I kept getting opportunities to work with forest departments, wildlife organizations, and then also from different corporates as well. And then obviously, with the Nat Geo grant coming into picture, a lot more options have opened up. So I think, yeah, I mean, if you want to get started, it's not too late. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm always here to help.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, there's another question. Shahnaz, you spoke about climate anxiety, which is so relatable. Do you think art can be a conduit to inspire more fundamental policy changes to tackle climate issues? As in, there have been supposed climate activists who took to destroying art to make a statement to governments and policymakers. Do you think doing the reverse, using art to inspire activism, will have an impact? Um, yeah, I think that happened recently. I did see it in the news. I have a lot of friends who are wildlife artists, and I mentioned a lot of examples in my talk as well. Rohan Chakravarti is a very dear friend of mine, and I mean, he's really taken the world by storm. If you just see his cartoons that he shares on social media every day, I think they're extremely impactful. And he's been invited to so many global forums where he gives talks, where he conducts workshops with children, and teaches them how to basically use that form of art to talk about climate issues. And then of course, I know of another artist who's a very dear friend, Nirupa Rao. And what's interesting, I don't know how many of you have seen this book. It's called The Pillars of Life, and she's the only artist who's sketched, or rather illustrated realistically, these trees which are found in, I think it was in Valparai, if I'm not wrong. And she's sketched these trees in its entirety. They are so tall that they cannot be photographed without anything in the background. So she has actually her art form or her style of painting is actually replaced photography. So even when photographers tried to photograph those trees, they couldn't do it. And Nirupa was the one who's actually realistically illustrated these trees, and it's in the book called Pillars of Life. And then again, there are so many other artists. I mentioned Asher J as well, and she's done a campaign on elephants in Africa. And she ran this film that she made in New York. And it got a lot of attention. And she was talking basically about the ivory trade, and it got a lot of attention. So there are, and then again, art again can be in so many different forms. What I'm doing is very different from what Asher J is doing, or from what Rohan is doing. And there are all kinds of people out there with ideas. And like I said, with social media, you don't have to wait for somebody to come and discover your art. You can just start sharing on social media. So yes, different forms of art can definitely be a conduit towards inspiring like fundamental policy changes. Any more questions?
If you have any more questions, then if not, then we can end the meeting here, right? Thank you, Niharika, for joining us,
Thanks, Anjali. Thanks a lot.
and hope we can see you offline sometime.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.